All right. So next, what I want to do is introduce you to a close cousin of the watercolor, and that's traditional gouache. Gouache has been one of the most prevalently used materials in illustration for many decades, at least. What it is watercolor with just a little something extra. So gouache has the same kind of pigments as are used in our watercolors. It also shares the same gum Arabic binder as our watercolors. But the last sort of ingredient that's notable and really kind of is a game changer for gouache is a little bit of calcium carbonate. And so calcium carbonate is chalk. What the chalk content does in gouache is it sort of limits the amount of absorption of the pigment that the sort of sinking into the paper that is able to happen. So it keeps the pigment and the paint sitting more on the surface of the paper. What that does is it keeps that pigment flexible and changeable on the surface of the paper. So, if you think about it in the context of illustration, an illustrator would come in, with the almost finished illustration, and the client might say, or the art director might say, oh no, I thought I wanted a purple hat, but I really wanted a pink one. And with gouache, you can always resaturate or reconstitute the pigment right on the surface of the paper to sort of change its quality or also remove it. So let me first demonstrate that. So I applied these kind of lines of purple on this hat yesterday. It's dried for 24 hours. It could dry a lot longer though, years, and you'd still be able to do this. And now with a clean brush and just a little bit of clean water, I'm going to start hydrating that line. And what you can see is first it starts pooling or bleeding like a watercolor is. So what I can do is I can sort of take that saturated pigment, desaturate it, and start pulling it into shapes. But I can also really start lifting it off the surface of the paper that way. So let me show you. Hydrate and then blot. Hydrate and then blot. Just to give you a sort of sense of the difference in materials, the background on this drawing is laid down, and so I'm really lifting a lot of this purple pigment off with patience. I can remove it nearly completely. Sorry, that may have been out of our view. So now you can see it's much lighter. Still lifting. But I've really sort of lifted and changed that pigment. Let me show you how it bleeds again. So just from that single dry line, I can pull the pigment right over the surface. can start getting some gentle and intentional color through that hat. The other thing that the calcium carbonate content does is it allows the pigment to be applied very flatly, very mattely. So let's see, let me mix up a little bit more purple. For this traditional gouache, available in class, I have what is called the process color mixing set. Process colors are magenta, cyan, and yellow. They become just a little bit more particular sort of primary color trio that allows us to mix pretty much any color we want. And what's important about it is the process colors are the colors that inkjet printers use and mix in combination to create their full subtractive color spectrum. So as an illustrator who kind of has a plan for their work to be reproduced for print-based materials like magazines, newspapers, posters, that will be produced on an inkjet printer, working with the sort of same kind of colors can be really smart. The traditional gouache, right out of the tube, come out a little bit pasty, so even just kind of fresh out of the tube, I recommend just spritzing with a little bit of water, clean water, just to loosen up that paint for application. But then, if you just kind of watch this dry, you will see that the gouache will apply really, really opaquely. It'll dry looking very flat, almost digitally produced. And so you can also achieve very flat, matte colors. This is a little frog illustration that I've done a thicker application of gouache. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you can kind of see the different effects. So because gouache is water soluble, you can do a very washy application that stays more flexible than watercolor, but you can also apply it in a very flat, matte way. The chalk content in it does make it sort of want to dry a little bit faster because that material really pulls moisture into it. So you might be adding water as you go. The other thing about gouache is you can mix it right on the surface. So I had kind of a warmer purple here in the hat. Now I'm adding a cooler one, and right on the surface I can mix it. That is something that watercolor is not able to do. With gouache, since the chalk keeps it on the surface, you can reconstitute your gouache work and refine, mix, shift right on the surface. The yellow in this drawing is watercolor, so it sits in a much more permanent way. But because they're so materially similar, they're going to play really nicely in combination. I highly recommend that you work with gouache and watercolor together. Also in our traditional gouache set, we have primary black, primary white. Tints and tones with gouache can be really effective as well. So I recommend playing with it. You set up a gouache palette sort of the same way. Set your primaries at opposite sides of your palette and mix some intermediary colors. Take some time, mix quite a bit in each well. After it's dried, for days, weeks, years even, you'll always be able to rehydrate your gouache with just a little spritz of water and patience. So this can be something you keep, something that travels with you. I recommend trying to sort of keep your gouache that you've mixed in the wells pretty pure, and then sort of mix combinations of the colors in the middle, and you can sort of clean that out as you go. And again, if you do something you're like, I wish I didn't, with gouache you can always rehydrate, lift, to either remove or make subtle enough that you can just sort of blend it in. All right? So that's traditional gouache. I'll be talking about it. It's going to come back in the next video, but that's all for now.